Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Best Phone Plans Podcast. Today, Dennis and I are joined by special guest Mike Dano from Light Reading. Mike, you've been putting out some amazing content about T-Mobile recently. They've been in the news. There's been a lot going on. So first, how are you doing today? And then I think we should just dive right into it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm doing very well. It's a little hot here in Denver, but otherwise all good. And thanks again for having me.
Yeah, Mike, I know what you're talking about. I was driving around doing speed tests yesterday in Denver, sweltering hot. Sweltering.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in Pittsburgh here, we had a nice, comfortable day today. It was like a nice little 72, just nice and comfortable.
We're jealous, Dennis.
Yeah,
Mike, you've been hard at work, a keyboard warrior, ninja typing out these articles. First one, T-Mobile celebrates 5G build-out with booze, but no maps. Love the title. What's going on here? What is T-Mobile celebrating?
Yeah, right. What is going on here? I appreciate it, and thanks for the kind words. T-Mobile had some announcement this week. I think the actual news was that they're like literally selling alcohol on their website. I'm pretty sure. I had to read the press release a couple of times, but I think that's what it said.
It's a different website. So it's tmobile5gin.com. And then it links you actually to another site where they're actually handling the orders, which looks like it's heritagedistilling.com. So I guess my question, did you order any, Mike?
You did the right digging. No, I haven't yet, but I do enjoy a fine gin and tonic occasionally. Responsibly.
yes, of course.
But no, I haven't. But it sounds to me like they slapped their brand on a bottle of gin, and so that's cool.
Yeah, what's the reason for this though? Like T-Mobile, they put up this website. They're selling alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages now. Like, is there a reason? Did their network hit some sort of milestone? Like, what's going on? I
mean, aside from the fact that booze is amazing, and I will soon be having some of my own. I think that the real, they have this big milestone, and they want to acknowledge it somehow, and they want to do it in a hip, cool way that's not boring like, an AT&T or a Verizon would do. And so, here we are with some T-Mobile branded booze to mark this occasion. Though, we're talking about it. I don't know if the rank and file customer base of T-Mobile is going to care that much, but maybe they will. I don't know. It does seem like it's something to do about this milestone that they've crossed. And you're right. The milestone that they crossed was that they now cover 300 million people with their extended range 5G and 150 million people with their ultra capacity 5G. And that's a big deal for them. I mean, that's a big milestone.
What does that mean for consumers? Like, what's the difference between their ultra capacity 5G and their extended range 5G?
Yeah, this is where we get into the weeds, and this is definitely where I spend the bulk of my time is figuring out what all this stuff actually means in real world speak. We'll start at the beginning. So there's 5G. There's the beginning of time. Humanity evolved. Then we have 5G. And there are three flavors or versions of 5G. There's the low band version, the mid band version, and the high band version. And they each have their own interesting and unique characteristics. And T-Mobile has mainly been focusing on the low band and mid band versions. And so all the carriers have this stuff. T-Mobile is not unique in having low band or mid band. T-Mobile has decided to brand their low band 5G as extended range, and they have branded their mid band 5G as ultra capacity. And so really it is just straight up marketing, whatever brand X type labels that they've applied to these different technologies. But it is not exclusive to T-Mobile. It is simply the brands that they've put onto these technologies that AT&T and Verizon also have.
So just finding creative ways to market exactly the same thing that all the carriers have.
It's so they put their brand on the gin, they put their brand on low band 5G, they put their brand on mid band, and that's what it is. But I mean, to be fair, there's reasons to brand this stuff. I think, first of all, not all 5G is the same by any stretch. I mean, there's crazy fast high band 5G that's like a gigabyte a second. But that's only available in like a football stadium and pretty much nowhere else. And then there's low band 5G, and you can get that anywhere, but it's really not that much faster than 4G. And then there's mid band 5G, and that's where all of the attention and interest is being focused right now. It's all about mid band 5G. For the year of 2021 is the year of mid band 5G for sure. And the fact that T-Mobile, so they've branded their mid-band 5G as ultra capacity. They cover 150 million people with that, and that is a lot of people. I mean, that's half the country, and probably most major cities. The remainder, I suspect, are in more rural locations. And so, the fact that they cover that many people with the speedy mid-band 5G. I mean, they said that customers can expect average speeds of 325 megabits a second, which is almost twice as fast as the connection I'm speaking to you on now. My home broadband is about half the speed of T-Mobile's mid-band 5G. Wow. So that's legit. That's fast.
Now, I do want to chime in and just say, though, like, what do you think of this idea that they're measuring it in, like, pops, right? Like, because, like, if I go out in, the real world, right, there might be a site, maybe two, that has like N41, right? And I might get coverage for maybe within a quarter mile of that cell site. But in reality, I wouldn't really call that covering all of Pittsburgh and delicious, mid-band 5G, you know what I mean? Even though I'm sure that's how T-Mobile probably looks at it when they lit up that one site. So, I mean, do you think the way that they're celebrating this really, is it really worth a celebration? Because the way I see it as it stands right now, T-Mobile's 5G performance isn't nothing that we haven't seen before. Like AT&T, I've done speed tests on the show before where AT&T's LTE speed test results were better than and outperforming everything T-Mobile's doing on the low band and mid band side of 5G at the moment.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, you probably know a lot about this too, about how what the coverage is like in real world terms and what the performance is really like. And so, those kinds of findings I think are really interesting. And I think, from my perspective, I think there's a couple of things going on. First is you mentioned that POPs, and that stands for, it's POP, point of presence, and it's a real old school wireless industry jargon glossary thing, and all it means is people covered. Points of presence is basically just like households and businesses and kind of where people live. And so that is a very standard way of counting coverage, and it's used by everyone. So I wouldn't necessarily read into that there's some sort of shady stuff going on. That's just sort of the accepted way of talking about cell coverage. But I think to your point, you are definitely right. Is like the speeds that you receive, that you personally receive, or that I receive here in Denver in this location. It's all about the individual circumstances that you're in. Are you inside? Are you outside? Is your phone in your pocket, or is it being held out above your head? Are there trees in the way? Is it raining? Is there a building between you and the cell site? How tall is the cell site? What spectrum band are you on? What phone do you have? Literally, what case have you put on your phone? All of those things will, like, in some cases, have a major impact on the speeds that you obtain at that time in that location. It's a crapshoot basically for speeds. So, when they say, an average of 300 megabits, like, who knows whether you'll actually get that or not. But the fact that they're saying it is putting a stake in the ground. And typically those kinds of average speed pronouncements are backed up with, actual data that does say, average customers can expect those kinds of speeds. But yeah, you're right. Like, when I do my speed tests on my phone, it's all over the place, and the reasons are varied, and sometimes inscrutable.
I guess just to kind of focus more on what I'm getting at is I feel like T-Mobile in the most recent times, their marketing has been a little bit too aggressive, like a little side tangent, but like we talked about an article recently where T-Mobile was claiming to have the largest like coverage across like highways. Am I misquoting this, Stetson?
Yeah, I think you're right. They said they have huge percentage of highways covered with T-Mobile 5G. It
was like 98% or 97% or something like that. And I basically got on a side tangent. I said, what world were they doing these measurements? Because, if you look at T-Mobile's total square mileage of footprint coverage just in general, it's a little bit under half of like the U.S. that they cover compared to like Verizon's square mileage of coverage or AT&T square mileage coverage. And if we specifically look at highways, even on T-Mobile's own native like coverage map, there is huge black pockets all in like California and the Midwest. There are major highways. I know in Pennsylvania, I-80 and like 376 are just crapshoots. So like it's like, how are you covering 97% of highways if you're ignoring like all these huge spans of coverage, Texas included? Like there's big holes, right? And I guess what I'm going for here is this: is like, yeah, this milestone is really, really cool. But I still feel like they haven't got to the point yet where it translates into a noticeable improvement. Like no business is going to be like, wow, T-Mobile's definitely the best choice right now if I want reliability and speed. They're still sticking like AT&T and Verizon are still the ones getting the contracts. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I agree. It is so hard to get real, firm, hard, accurate data from any of the carriers, including T-Mobile, about what they actually cover. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Partly is that mapping out cell coverage is not easy, and it can fluctuate depending on what the power levels are and weather and stuff. But the other thing too is that there's a large range of ways of measuring and mapping cell coverage. So, we're probably all familiar with companies like Ookla, Speed Test, and OpenSignal, and Tutla.
Tutela, yeah.
Tutela, Umlaut is another one. There's RootMetrics, yeah. I mean, there's lots of them out there. GWS, and they all have different testing methodologies. Some actually get in a car and drive around. Some use apps that track your data on your phone. There's lots of different ways of picking all that up. And the carriers themselves also have different ways of tracking how their networks are performing and how many people they cover. And so, I think at a certain point you do have to take some of these carriers at their word. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
But I will say though that because if you and I wanted to go and map the network, we could. I'm not sure that that would be a good use of our time. I'd love to drive around with you and just hang out and like test the coverage. Like that'd be super fun. But I mean, it's hard to do. And here's the other thing is that the FCC, the U.S. government does collect mapping data from these cell carriers, and so it collects that information. The companies submit it themselves. The FCC, I think it was 2 years ago, actually did a coverage test. Like it went out and tested the actual coverage and compared it with what the carriers were saying. So the carriers said this, FCC actually went out on the ground and tested it. And FCC found out that in some cases the coverage was misstated by 40%.
Holy smokes.
Which is a huge, I mean,
that's almost half.
Those maps just basically were lying. Like it wasn't telling the truth of their actual coverage. And the FCC went out and found this. And so, here we are is like, nothing is what it seems, down is up, black is white. I mean, so yeah.
Hence the reason of distrust, especially when it comes to T-Mobile, because, T-Mobile knows what they're doing, right? They know the marketing is what gets the consumer sales, but They're putting the cart before the horse. I feel like with this celebration. That's my stance on it personally. That's how I kind of look at it.
And I think that's fair. I mean, I do know that they are building out their network. I know that is happening, and they're spending a lot of money to do it. The extent to which they've reached those milestones, hard to say, but yeah, it's happening. I think it's going pretty slow, and they're spending a lot of money on it, and presumably at some point in the future they'll have a lot to show for it. But yeah, this is still early days. I think you're right.
I hope so. Yeah, T-Mobile is saying their ultra capacity 5G will hopefully reach over 200 million people by the end of this year. So we'll see how that goes. That's an increase of 50 million people. And then this kind of ties in nicely, coverage maps and the coverage areas. Mike, you ended your T-Mobile article, but no maps. Those are the two words you ended. Like, T-Mobile hit this 5G milestone, but like, what's missing from their 5G coverage map right now?
Yeah. And here's my T-Mobile thing. Their maps may not be accurate, like you said, and that's certainly a thing. And the thing that I cannot get over is the fact that T-Mobile doesn't have a map of its 5G coverage. So to be clear, like, they do have a map, and it does show 5G coverage. What it does not show is it doesn't show whether that coverage is extended range 5G, low band, or if it is ultra capacity mid-band 5G. It doesn't show that difference. So, pretend you are at the end of your Verizon contract. You hate Verizon with a fierce and burning passion, and you desperately want to, churn to somebody else. And so you go to T-Mobile, and you've heard so much about how great their 5G is. Well, I wonder if I have their fast 5G. You can't check. There's no way to know. So why is T-Mobile putting all this emphasis on ultra capacity? Oh, it's so great. It's so much better than what Verizon has. It's amazing. It's revolutionary. Fourth industrial revolution. Blow your socks off. Like, you can't see where it is. So what is the point of this whole thing that they've been literally T-Mobile has been talking about ultra capacity for an entire year now. Everything from that company, from the top executive to the bottom, is ultra capacity, mid-band. It's amazing. No maps. Can't find it. No, it boggles my mind that, and then all right, and I'll let me point this last thing out, because I cannot believe it. It is the height of hypocrisy is that in 2019, when Verizon was in the very early stages of its own 5G build out using high band spectrum, T-Mobile had an entire advertising campaign about, hey, Verizon doesn't have any maps. Where are the maps, Verizon? They had a hashtag Verheizen. It's hiding the maps. Oh, Verizon, you're so bad. Why don't you have any maps? Your service must be terrible. You should publish maps. And here we are, more than a year into T-Mobile's build out, no maps. And so I'm sure that T-Mobile doesn't like this, but I have my own little hashtag for them, which is called T-Muddle. I thought it was witty, but I don't think that they do. But I mean, it's just, it's a little bit of hypocrisy there, I think.
Oh my gosh. You're so right, Mike. I mean, you look at a T-Mobile map, and it's just like you gave a 5-year-old a map of the U.S. and a magenta crayon, and they just went ham, and it all looks the same. You can't tell anything. You look at a Verizon map, you're getting minute details, what street addresses have their millimeter wave 5G coverage. It's night and day different.
I just want to say two things as well. I find it, what's also ironic is if we turn back the clock to like 2014, 2015, T-Mobile used to be super genuine about their coverage maps. If you remember, they had the check marks with the Ookla speed test results that we were pulling, very clearly coded, where they had 2G, HSPA plus, and LTE. They were very upfront about it. So we know they know how to do it. And the second thing I just wanted to say was, I think we all know the answer. Well, in my opinion, I know the answer why T-Mobile isn't showing off their ultra wide or their ultra capacity 5G. It's probably because the actual coverage is probably very small. They're not actually confident around it. If they actually showed it, it'd probably just be a few little MS Paint blocks for maybe the top 50 U.S. markets to get that 150 million people. It's not going to be anywhere that actually, as you would put it, matters, right? You use the example of millimeter wave only being on football stadiums. Well, T-Mobile's ultra wideband is probably only in a few different little cities,
Yeah, I don't know. I will say I'm still digging into this topic. I haven't fully sort of figured it out yet, but there does seem to be some issues with that 2.5 gigahertz spectrum that T-Mobile is using for ultra capacity. That is its mid-band spectrum, and that spectrum has really caused a lot of companies problems. It was difficult for Sprint. It was difficult for Clearwire. This is the same spectrum that they tried to use, and now T-Mobile owns that exact same spectrum. And I wonder if I mean, because they are not saying anything about it, they have no maps to show us. I have to speculate that there may be issues around the use of that spectrum, the propagation characteristics of that spectrum, and also the licensing characteristics, because those spectrum licenses are they're not drawn out in real nice clear areas. It was actually allocated in like the 50s or 60s to churches and universities for educational TV. I mean, that's where that spectrum was initially sort of given out, and over the course of the years, a company called Nextel collected it, and then Sprint got it, and so I think it's messy. I think that build out is messy. I think you're right, and I think probably what you are seeing with your speed tests is a result of the messiness of the power levels that they've got, the licensing structure, the propagation. I think it's just messy.
Yeah, it's a dirty spectrum. It's there's a lot of stuff out there, whether it be 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi or a lot of other stuff that's out there that's sort of in that range where it can cause interference, where you have to basically have your guard bands on and be careful with the power and all that good stuff. Not to mention, if we're talking about along the U.S. borders between Canada and the U.S. or down in Mexico and the U.S., they use band 7, which is basically a different flavor of the band, the N41. So they have to be careful about how they're pointing a direction so that they don't cause interference with the Canadian providers and vice versa. Yeah. So yeah, it's got a lot of problems inherent to it, which ironically enough, I think gives Verizon and AT&T a huge advantage with the C-band spectrum that they got, since it's relatively clean. There's no real interference that they worry about from any nearby spectrum frequencies at the moment.
Yeah.
I think this kind of segues nicely into Mike. Yet another great article. AT&T, T-Mobile don't want to reveal signal strength data, right? So we're talking about these maps. T-Mobile's map we don't feel is as great as it could be. Other maps could be way more accurate. The FCC did a test. They're inaccurate 40% of the time. So what is the FCC trying to do? And why do AT&T and T-Mobile seem opposed to it right now?
Yeah. Oh, boy. Okay. Let's all buckle up, because we're going to talk Washington, D.C. Broadband mapping policy, which is, if 2.5 gigahertz licensing was complex, that pales in comparison to what's going on in D.C. So, there is a lot of debate about broadband maps in the U.S. This is not a new topic. It's been years and years worth of senators from Arkansas standing up and complaining about how my broadband maps don't look right. It's just this whole, it just goes on. It's been years of this, of complaining about how there's not coverage, and they say there's coverage. So what the real problem, though, is that if the maps that the U.S. government uses for broadband are not accurate, the U.S. government cannot figure out where the digital divide is and how to cross it. And that's a big deal, because internet and broadband have very quickly moved from a nice to have to a need to have because of the pandemic. It forced everyone to work and school from home. Kids had to go to the Starbucks parking lot to get the Wi-Fi because they didn't have home internet. This is something that Republicans and Democrats have decided is something that they want to fix. And they want to fix it by giving lots and lots of money to companies to build broadband in rural areas. So the fact that the U.S. government doesn't have accurate maps has become a real stumbling block to that whole process, because you don't know where you need to spend the money, because your maps are not accurate. And the maps are not accurate because you're getting the maps from the providers themselves, who are not providing accurate maps. As a result, the FCC has embarked, this new FCC under acting chairwoman Rosenworcel has embarked on a major mapping campaign. They've gotten funding from Congress for this. It's millions of dollars that they're spending on this program to improve the accuracy of broadband maps in the U.S. They are midway through that process. They should be done by the end of this year. What they are doing is going to collect information from a variety of sources, including the carriers, as well as regular users and companies like Ookla that test maps or create their own usage maps. And they're going to collect all that information and create some more accurate broadband maps so that the Biden administration and the lawmakers who support that will be able to spend the money accurately to improve broadband. Anyway, so I said it was a complicated. So now that brings to what we're talking about, which is the signal strength thing. So one of the things that the FCC is doing is they're asking for more accurate data on cellular coverage. So previously they used to get this like real basic, they called it Form 477, that companies would submit to the FCC, like, we cover this area, period. And it was like no data, nothing. It was just like, yeah, that area, oh, that's covered, don't worry about it. But now the FCC is like, okay, well, why don't you actually provide us with real coverage data? What is the signal strength? What is how fast is it going to be? What's the cell edge? What's the speed at the cell edge? Blah, blah, blah. Like, they want more data. So that's what the FCC has told the wireless industry. You need to provide this information to us. And anytime the government asks for information from companies, they never want to give it. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be, what is your first name? And the CEO will be like, well, do you really need that? I don't know. Is it the full name? It's just they never want to give any information because they're companies and they don't want to deal with the government. They just want to get the billions of dollars of subsidy that the government wants to hand out without any checks or, without any, ways of tracking that kind of. Anyway, so what I did write about this week and what you mentioned was the notion of signal strength. And so basically, AT&T and T-Mobile said that we don't want to give you that signal strength data because you don't need it. And they had a bunch of reasons that probably maybe made sense. Honestly, to me, it didn't. I mean, they don't want to give that data, and I'm sure they have good reasons for it. I could
think of two. I mean, I could think of two quick reasons. One is that they probably don't want to give it to them because then it's going to be available for everybody to see. And if I'm a competitor that wants to come in that I know that you're like bad in that area, then I know that and I can, take advantage of that basically, right? I can steal customers from you. And then two, I mean, I'm going to say a very small amount of merit to what they're saying. Like the amount of bars that I have on my phone doesn't necessarily equal better performance, right? Like if I'm connected to band 71 5x5 megahertz, I might only see like 10 megabits per second. But if I was connected to N41 with only like one bar, I'm going to see maybe 100 megabits per second. So there is a little bit, very weak amount of statement behind it. But overall, I still think it's complete bogus. They should just offer that data because it's important to know that there's actually coverage there, period, and how good the coverage is. I
mean, they do have coverage maps on their websites. That seems to be also useful that they would want to give out, and so might not give the FCC that same data. The other thing, too, is that if they give to the government, we cover this area, then they may be liable for that. So if they do not cover that area and you are injured in that area and you cannot call for help or make a 911 call, that could also put them into a legal situation. And then, the final part of that, though, I think that is worth noting is that the FCC is asking for a lot of mapping data. Signal strength is one thing. The other thing that they are asking for is something called a link budget. And I am simply not smart enough to understand what that means. But my general understanding is that a link budget is the hardcore, like deep networking information about, did this phone receive this signal? Yes or no? And here it is. So a link budget, I think, is my understanding, is a very detailed list of does it connect? Yes or no? And if so, how good is that connection? So
I'll give a shorter version of that might be a little bit more accurate. Basically, it's basically looking at the signal to noise ratio. Basically, is this signal good enough to use or not? is basically the long and short of it. Like, is it good enough to use? Can you make a call on it? Type of deal.
And so if they are providing that, they wouldn't necessarily need to provide signal strength also in addition to that?
So there's signal strength. Okay, so you can have. I know this is going to sound really weird. I don't want to get super nerdy, but it happens a lot with like cable DOCSIS channels and stuff like that too. Basically, you could have a super strong signal, but just like there's too much of a good thing, if the signal's too strong and your noise floor is too close to like where your actual signal to noise ratio is, when you try to like, it'd be like trying to have a conversation with a jet engine going on in the background right now if the signal was too strong, type of deal. Vice versa, if the signal is too weak, it would be like trying to whisper something to you with like you being like a mile away. So it needs to be like within an acceptable range of parameters. And the link budget is basically just saying like, hey, is this signal actually usable? Is my signal to noise ratio far enough apart that this is usable signal? Like if I wanted to place a call, it would connect just fine and kind of work. And that's the really super dumbed down version of it in like 30 seconds. But
that's more than I got. And so is the one better than the other, or do you think that both would be valuable?
They're both important to have, right? Like you want to have, the reason why you want to have the RSSI values is just because it's a more accurate prediction of like how the actual coverage is, i.e. So I'm sorry if I relate this back to cable. Basically, when you go to a node in a cable plant, it might be amping out power at like plus 8 dBm. But that's fine because when you ultimately set up in someone's consumer's houses, there's going to be a splitter that you use to reduce that dBm to try to get as close to a value of 0 and to up your noise floor, right? In the same way, a cell tower has a set power set because they know that as you get further away from the cell site, there's going to be things that get in the way, whether it be the trees or the rain or the birds or the bees or whatever, that reduces the power. And you basically got to test it at different points, right? Close to the cell site, mid cell site, and an edge of cell site to see like what these values are as far as the actual signal is concerned. And you can also look at the other aspect, which is your link budget, right? First, do I have signal? How strong is it? And then is my noise, is my SNR basically, far enough apart that I'm getting an actual usable connection? They're like two different things. It's
so you could use both. Technically,
you could use both and like make an overlapping map in a sense to get a better understanding. Like, okay, you have great service here and it's usable. You have little service here, but it is usable. Or you have great signal, but it's actually not usable.
I guess the more accurate way of using this would be like this. You can basically, if it's more of like for the FCC to make accurate coverage maps, because if you have one without the other, well, you can't really have one without the other, but if you did have one without the other, you can eliminate some of that coverage as this is not actually usable coverage in any circumstance, right? Or this would require something specific like an amp or a small cell to basically extend that coverage X amount of miles or feet or whatever it is. But I feel like I'm sorry for getting us too into the weeds. And
I know, boy, we're way down there now.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. I think it's so interesting though. Like,
yeah, I agree.
What would you guys use to try and build your own coverage maps? Like, I've been driving around, so I found RootMetrics has their own coverage map. It's called literally Coverage Map. They couldn't think of a better name. It's so hard to recommend to people. But you can run continuous speed tests on the app. And I found, like, if I go run this app, drive around my city of Longmont, and I come home, I'll see the hexagons on the RootMetrics map updated with my new data. I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. I'm going to drive around the entire city of Longmont doing this and like get accurate maps. And this is taking into consideration, I think, mostly speed. Like you can toggle between best technology found, best speed found, things like that. What metrics or data would you guys use to try and build out maps?
I'm going to go first real quick because I have a pretty foolproof plan. I would definitely take advantage of consumer devices to collect data. However, you need a controlled variable. So you need to have people that actually go around like RootMetrics style in their van with like, 4 phones running 5G, 4 phones running LTE. And you got to be able to like do these speed tests, right, with like a controlled variable for comparison. So I'd have a team of people, some third party that does that for all the carriers, right? They're driving around testing it. I'd collect data, maybe using like apps on people's phones, or maybe I would put a mandate in that all phones have to have this X, Y, and Z software pre-installed, so it just collects the data natively without the
instead of Candy Crush, we could actually do something productive
without the user's consent type of deal to collect data from like the wide masses. But then lastly, I would actually incorporate the carriers. Like when the carriers do an upgrade, before they could do a claim, their head engineer, whoever is doing it, needs to also run some speed tests to show like this is what's happening at the base station itself, and then that way you can compile this data and make it more accurate. And that would be like my trifecta. So basically, third party that drives around every quarter or year, consumer phones, and then also getting feedback from the carriers all together to make an accurate coverage map.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mike, I mean, I think Dennis just covered everything.
Solved, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you be using, Dennis, like the signal to noise ratio and those values, or would you use speeds? Like,
I mean, I'd be looking at a variety of things. Like I would look at the power. So like, let's just say there was a cell site right at my house, right? I would look at the power levels that T-Mobile's transmitting on. And then because I'm the freaking government, I would also look at the fact that there's an airport like right next to me. So I know that there's going to be some certain limitations that T-Mobile can't, do, right? Because that's data I know that they don't. And I'll look at, consumer data that was collected about phones in the zip code or whatever, the amount of footprint it is. And then I would look at what the engineering speed retest results are. And I would basically just take some type of average, right? Like I'd be like, okay, here's the average speeds you could expect based off this third-party data that was collected. Here is the usable signal range. Maybe I'd have like some type of color that shows when you're by the airport, you might not be able to connect because of the interference that's coming from, the towers and stuff like that, right? Because the tower can't be pointed in that direction for X, Y, and Z reasons, right? Just something that clearly outlines. Like, green is great, yellow is mellow, and red is bad. Your mileage may vary. Something like that.
Wow. Dennis, you're hired. FCC, I can hear them calling right now, hiring you onto their campaign. Maybe Root Metrics even get someone from there.
Yeah, like all that link budget stuff. Like the end user doesn't need to see that. That'll just all be in a database, big old Excel sheet or Access or something that is for calculating purposes. But keep it simple: green, red, green, yellow, red. Right? Make it simple colors that anybody can understand.
Yeah, I think speeds for me are probably the most important because I feel like if you're in an area and you get good speeds, that's a good sign. And I don't know, that would be the most helpful for me as a consumer.
Hexagon check marks would be the speed thing. Like how T-Mobile used to do with Oppo.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I just do like little hexagons. You click on the check mark and you can see, the amount of data samples that was taken for that location and average speed. And it'd be like, 25 down, 3 up or whatever the actual average was.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, that was a deep dive, scuba dive into.
Oh, wait, we got to hear Mike Dano's point. What would he do?
Oh yeah, no, I don't think I have any good. I solve problems. I only point them out. Here's what I would say is that there's a couple of things. One is that every base station that is installed is registered with the government, so they already know that. The other thing is that they have the government operates a huge fleet of testing vehicles in the name of USPS. So, I mean, they're already,
Mike, that is brilliant.
I got the mail just now. Like he's driving around. Why, there's plenty of resources.
Every address.
There's plenty of resources to pull this off. You got to do it.
Dude,
wow.
that's an actually really effective way to do it. Use the USPS, just attach like an antenna on the top of that bad boy, and there you go.
Done.
All right, everybody, we're getting phone upgrades this year. No more low quality Android phone with a 3 megapixel camera. We're getting like all new S21s or all new iPhones, and they're just going to run speed tests in the background, by the way.
That's hilarious.
I love that, Mike.
I will just say, by the way, Microsoft actually did a fairly accurate job of looking at just broadband in general access across the U.S. And if I remember correctly, like from their studies, I think it was like, from their testing, only like half of the U.S. actually has access to what is defined as like FCC broadband. It's like a lot less than what we claim to have. And by FCC definition of broadband, I mean like 25 down, like 3 up, like reliably kind of deal. And something like only like half. And like the vast majority of Americans only have like one option as far as like internet that meets like the definitions of broadband. And very small pockets, like maybe 5-10% have like 2 or 3 options that actually can meet that definition, which I also found interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's really interesting too that this situation is changing fast. You've got SpaceX, Starlink, satellites that are covering global. You already have satellite internet that's slow and expensive. You have new satellite internet that's fast and not as expensive. And pretty soon we'll have phones, I think, in the next few years that will literally connect to satellites. So you will never have a dead zone again. You won't have fast speeds, but you will be able to make a call. So all these things we're talking about now, I think, will be rapidly overtaken by developments in the market.
Fingers crossed that, and I'm hoping that Biden's infrastructure bill gets passed. Although
they said it's I was going to say the $100 billion.
Yeah, but the $100 billion though, there was some articles I was reading was saying like it's not going to be enough. There are people saying you need like double that to make like a den if you want to like deploy fiber and stuff.
Yeah,
but
we'll see.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I mean, it is a laudable goal to connect the unconnected, but yeah, I think you got to find them first.
You got to find them. That's true.
Easier said than done.
Or you can just do what I do. Just move. Find a place that has Fios and move.
Yeah.
Joking.
Right.
I'm joking. But let's move on to the last topic about your T-Mobile enters the ad tech biz as rivals pull out.
Yeah, I think this is kind of the last bit of T-Mobile news from this week. They've been on a roll, launching their own beverages, declining mapping data, and entering the ad biz. So I think we had some stories a while ago where T-Mobile, they had this advertiser policy when you signed up. It used to be opt-in, and they switched that to make it opt-out. So everyone by default was enrolled, and you actually have to opt out, which I think flipped the stats from being like 20% enrolled by default to like 80% enrolled by default. So yeah, Mike, can you talk about what T-Mobile's doing and what's going on with their ad tech?
Yeah. And again, this is there's a lot of backstory to this, which is that, everyone knows that mobile operators like T-Mobile and Verizon, AT&T, they have a very valuable data in that they know what's on your phone and they know where you go. And that's data that advertisers want. And I don't think any of us are naive to believe that the stuff that we do on the internet is not monetized. So, Twitter tracks our movements, Facebook tracks our movements, practically any website that you go to tracks your movements. This is the age we live in now. It may have been shocking 10 years ago. I don't think it's anymore. And Verizon and AT&T have long made a business out of selling their customers' data. And now T-Mobile is joining them. I think what's interesting is that T-Mobile is joining in this interesting situation now that, first of all, Apple is cracking down on this. So in iOS 14, Apple stopped allowing apps to track you across the device. At the same time, Google is removing third-party cookies from their browser. They actually just delayed that till 2023, but still, it's sort of this thing that's in process. Plus, there's a lot of state regulation in California, as well as federal regulation, as well as the really harsh regulations out of Europe about tracking people. So there's all these sort of factors that are happening right now that's making that data more valuable because it is harder to obtain. T-Mobile does have it. T-Mobile has new leadership now that I think has a different view of selling its customers' data. And, here we are this week that they launched a full-blown marketing solutions operation, the job of which is to take information from their customers and to sell it to advertisers. And the only notable thing in that sentence is the fact that T-Mobile is one of the last companies to start doing that, rather than the first. Everybody else is already doing it.
Wow. So yeah, they're kind of late to the game. And I think my understanding is they'll collect the data and then aggregate it themselves on their platform and then sell sort of targeting groups to advertisers. So like they'll know you go to a certain store, but they're not giving that exact location to the advertisers.
Correct. And so that's what they all say. We do not give your personal information. We do not give your personal location. But if you've followed any of the reporting from New York Times or ProPublica or any of Washington Post, any of these major organizations, there have been just dozens of stories written by these publications that show that that is not true. In fact, New York Times was able to identify, I think it was several dozen people who were involved in the Capitol, storming the Capitol on January 6th with this kind of advertising tracking data. So they were able to track them to their homes and look up their addresses and figure out who these guys were that broke into our nation's capital, all with this kind of stuff that T-Mobile is now selling to advertisers. So, I think it's this is the world we live in, but these promises that it's anonymous data, the evidence does not bear that out.
Got it. Well, I think that's pretty much all I have. Dennis, anything else you want to throw in here?
No, I just want to thank you again, Mike, though, for coming in on the podcast again. It is always fantastic to have you. I want to take this as a chance for you to give a shout out to our audience where they can find more of your articles because they are truly fantastic. If you want to just take a moment to tell the guests anything that you're working on or want to shout out real quick.
For sure. No, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I really enjoy talking with you guys and learning all about link budgets. I know more about link budgets now than I thought I ever would. I only know the name, so now I'm stuck up on that. So that was great. I am a reporter. I work for a website called lightreading.com, spelled just like it sounds, lightreading.com. So all my articles appear there. I'm on the Twitters at Mike D. Dano, and I'm on LinkedIn too, and post there occasionally.
Awesome. We'll have that linked in the show notes or description, wherever this podcast is found. Mike, thank you so much for taking your time, talking with us about everything T-Mobile is going on, diving into some coverage maps and more. And to anyone who's listening, consider subscribing, tuning into the next episode. And I think that's going to be it for the show.
Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
Peace.
Bye.